Imagine you're a medieval political consultant whose job is to predict what empires will do next. By 800 Anno Domini, you think you've figured out the patterns. Big empires fragment when they get too diverse. Small kingdoms unite when they face external threats. Religious authorities stay in their lane. Vikings stick to coastal raiding. Civilizations rise and fall predictably over centuries, not decades. You write up your strategic forecast for the 9th century. The Carolingians will consolidate their new empire. The Abbasids will stabilize their administration. The Byzantines will continue their modest recovery. And everyone will spend the next 100 years fine-tuning the systems they've already built. You're confident enough to stake your reputation on it. By 900 Anno Domini, your predictions have become a case study in how spectacularly wrong experts can be. The Carolingian Empire has exploded into civil war and Viking occupation. The Abbasid Caliphate has become a puppet show run by Turkish mercenaries. The Byzantine Empire has conquered Bulgaria and is challenging everyone to fight about it. The Vikings have somehow founded cities, established trade routes, and created kingdoms from Ireland to Russia. And in the most absurd development of all, someone in Central Europe has figured out how to turn barbarian raiding into a systematic military machine that makes the Hun invasions look like practice runs. Welcome to the 9th century Anno Domini, when the medieval world looked at everyone's careful plans and said, "That's adorable. Watch this." This is the century that proved the only constant in medieval politics was that nothing stayed constant for more than 20 years. Here are 10 mind-blowing facts about the century that turned medieval geopolitics into a continuous series of "wait, what just happened?" moments. Fact number 1. The Carolingian Empire ate itself in the world's most expensive family feud. Charlemagne's empire, which had seemed like the restoration of Roman unity in Western Europe, dissolved into fratricidal warfare so destructive that his grandsons literally drew maps dividing territories they were still fighting over. The trouble began immediately after Charlemagne's death in 814 Anno Domini. His son Louis the Pious, 814 to 840, spent his reign trying to hold together an empire that was too big, too diverse, and too dependent on the personal authority of a single ruler. When Louis died, his 3 sons, Lothair, Louis the German, and Charles the Bald, went to war over the inheritance. The civil wars of the 840s were devastating, beyond anything Western Europe had experienced since the barbarian invasions. The Battle of Fontenoy, 841, saw Frankish armies slaughter each other with a ferocity that shocked contemporary observers. One chronicler wrote that the battlefield was so covered with noble corpses that it looked like the end of the world. The Treaty of Verdun, 843, officially partitioned the empire into 3 kingdoms, but the brothers continued fighting over the exact boundaries for decades. Each partition weakened royal authority and strengthened local nobles who played different kings against each other for territorial advantages. The Carolingian civil wars created a power vacuum that invited external intervention. Vikings began raiding deep into Frankish territory, sometimes being paid by one Carolingian king to attack his brother's lands. The Magyars started raiding from the east. Local nobles built private armies and fortifications, creating the feudal fragmentation that would define medieval Europe. By 900 Anno Domini, the Carolingian Empire existed only as a legal fiction. Real power had devolved to dukes, counts, and local strongmen, who acknowledged royal authority when convenient and ignored it when profitable. The dream of a restored Western Roman Empire had lasted exactly 1 generation. Fact number 2. The Vikings went from raiders to nation builders in 50 years. The Vikings, who had begun the 8th century as coastal pirates, spent the 9th century establishing kingdoms, founding cities, and creating trade networks that connected Europe, Asia, and North America in ways that wouldn't be matched until the modern era. The transformation was remarkable in its speed and scope. Vikings established the Kingdom of Dublin, 841, conquered most of northern and eastern England, founded Normandy, 911, discovered Iceland, 874, and established trading posts from Greenland to Constantinople. The secret to Viking success wasn't just military prowess, it was adaptability. In Ireland, they became urban merchants. In England, they became agricultural settlers. In Francia, they became feudal nobles. In Russia, they became river traders, connecting Scandinavia to Byzantium and the Islamic world. The Viking expansion created the first truly global trading network of the medieval period. Viking merchants carried furs from Siberia to markets in Constantinople, silver from Islamic mines to Scandinavia, and amber from the Baltic to craftsmen in Baghdad. Archaeological evidence shows Viking artifacts in locations from Newfoundland to Central Asia. Most remarkably, the Vikings achieved this transformation while maintaining their cultural identity. They didn't become absorbed by the civilizations they conquered. They created hybrid cultures that combined Scandinavian traditions with local practices. Norman culture in France, Anglo-Danish culture in England, and Kievan Rus culture in Russia all represented successful Viking adaptations rather than assimilations. The Vikings also developed sophisticated governmental institutions. The Althing in Iceland, established in 930, was one of the world's oldest parliamentary assemblies. Viking legal codes combined Scandinavian customs with Christian principles and local traditions, creating legal systems that influenced European law for centuries. By 900 Anno Domini, the age of pure Viking raiding was over. The Scandinavians had become a major European power, with kingdoms, cities, trade networks, and diplomatic relationships throughout the known world. Fact number 3. The Abbasid caliphs became prisoners in their own palaces. The Abbasid Caliphate, which had overthrown the Umayyads to restore Islamic unity, spent the 9th century being systematically reduced to a ceremonial office controlled by Turkish military commanders who treated caliphs like expensive pets. The transformation began when the Abbasids started recruiting Turkish slave soldiers, Mamluks, to serve as their personal guard and military elite. The Turks were excellent soldiers, but they were also foreigners with no loyalty to Arab traditions or Islamic theological principles. They served whoever paid them best and obeyed whoever controlled their military units. The Turkish commanders gradually realized that they could control policy by controlling access to the caliph. They moved the capital from Baghdad to Samarra, 836, where they could isolate the caliph from civilian administrators and religious leaders. Within a generation, the caliph had become a ceremonial figurehead who announced policies developed by Turkish military councils. The nadir came during the anarchy at Samarra, 861 to 870, when Turkish commanders murdered 4 caliphs in 9 years, treating the caliphate like a military office that could be filled or vacated at will. Caliphs were appointed, deposed, and executed based on their willingness to cooperate with Turkish political objectives. Meanwhile, the actual Islamic world was fragmenting into independent dynasties that acknowledged the caliph's religious authority while ignoring his political commands. The Tulunids controlled Egypt, the Saffarids controlled eastern Iran, and the Aghlabids controlled North Africa. Each dynasty collected taxes, maintained armies, and conducted foreign relations independently. By 900 Anno Domini, the caliph was primarily a religious figurehead who validated the authority of regional rulers in exchange for nominal recognition and financial support. The age of unified Islamic empire was definitively over. Fact number 4. The Byzantines decided to conquer Bulgaria and started a century-long war. The Byzantine Empire, fresh from its 8th century recovery, looked at the powerful Bulgarian kingdom on its northern border and decided that diplomacy was for weaklings. The resulting Bulgarian wars consumed resources, destroyed armies, and created one of the most brutal conflicts in medieval European history. The First Bulgarian Empire, 681 to 1018, had been a significant regional power since the 7th century, controlling territory from the Danube to the Aegean Sea, and maintaining successful diplomatic relationships with both Byzantium and the Carolingian Empire. The Bulgarians had adopted Christianity, developed sophisticated administrative systems, and created a distinctive Slavic culture. Emperor Nicephorus I, 802 to 811, decided that Byzantine prestige required eliminating Bulgarian independence. His invasion of 811 was a catastrophic failure that ended with the emperor's death in battle, and his skull being turned into a drinking cup by the Bulgarian Khan Krum. The Byzantine defeat at Pliska, 811, was one of the worst military disasters in imperial history. An entire Byzantine army was destroyed, the imperial treasury was captured, and Bulgarian forces raided to the walls of Constantinople. The empire that had been recovering territory from the Arabs suddenly found itself fighting for survival against Slavic neighbors. The Bulgarian wars continued intermittently for over a century, with each side achieving temporary victories that were reversed by the next generation's campaigns. The Byzantines captured the Bulgarian capital of Preslav multiple times, only to lose it again. The Bulgarians besieged Constantinople and Thessalonica, only to be driven back by Byzantine counterattacks. The wars were remarkably destructive because both sides had similar military capabilities and governmental systems. Unlike the Islamic conquests, which often succeeded through superior mobility and motivation, the Bulgarian wars were slugging matches between comparable medieval states. Fact number 5. The Magyars invented. Mobile warfare and terrorized Europe for 50 years. The Magyar invasions of the late 9th and early 10th centuries introduced a new form of warfare to Europe. Highly mobile horse archers who could appear anywhere, destroy everything, and disappear before defenders could organize effective resistance. The Magyars were a nomadic people from the Eurasian steppes who had been displaced by other tribal movements and were seeking new territories to settle. They entered Europe around 895 and immediately demonstrated that they had learned military lessons that European kingdoms had forgotten since the Hun invasions. Magyar tactics were devastatingly effective against European military systems designed for fighting other European armies. They avoided fortified positions, refused pitched battles, and used superior mobility to strike targets that couldn't be defended. A Magyar army could raid deep into Germany, France, or Italy, and return to their Hungarian base before local rulers could mobilize pursuit forces. The psychological impact of Magyar raids was enormous. European chroniclers described them as divine punishment for Christian sins, comparing them to biblical plagues and apocalyptic invasions. The Magyars seemed to strike randomly and disappear mysteriously, creating terror that was disproportionate to their actual numbers. European responses were initially ineffective because they were based on traditional military thinking. Building more fortifications didn't help when raiders avoided fortified positions. Raising larger armies didn't help when the enemy refused to fight those armies. Diplomatic negotiations were difficult when the Magyars were primarily interested in plunder rather than territorial control. The Magyar threat finally ended when they settled in Hungary and adopted European military and political systems. The Battle of Lechfeld, 955, marked the end of Magyar raiding and the beginning of Hungarian integration into European Christianity and feudalism. Fact number 6. The Pope discovered he could start holy wars. The 9th century saw the papacy develop the concept of religious warfare as a legitimate Christian activity, transforming the Church from an institution that reluctantly accepted necessary wars into one that actively promoted religious violence as spiritually beneficial. The transformation began with the Islamic conquest of Sicily, 827 to 902, and the subsequent Muslim raids on the Italian mainland. For the first time since the 7th century, Islamic armies were attacking Christian territories that were under direct papal authority and threatening Rome itself. Pope Leo IV, 847 to 855, responded by promising spiritual rewards for Christians who died fighting Muslim invaders. This was a revolutionary development. The early Christian Church had been deeply suspicious of warfare, and even the acceptance of just war theory had been reluctant and defensive. The papal development of holy war ideology continued with the conflicts against Viking raiders and pagan Magyars. The Church began arguing that violence against non-Christians wasn't just permissible, but spiritually meritorious when conducted for religious purposes. The intellectual framework for holy war was developed by church scholars who argued that violence in defense of Christianity was a form of spiritual discipline comparable to monastic asceticism. Fighting infidels became a path to salvation rather than an obstacle to Christian virtue. Most importantly, the development of holy war ideology marked the end of the early Christian Church's pacifist traditions and the beginning of militant Christianity as a major force in European politics. Fact number 7. The Chinese Tang dynasty collapsed, and nobody in Europe noticed. The Anlushan Rebellion, 755 to 763, and subsequent Tang decline eliminated the world's most advanced civilization, while European and Islamic societies were too focused on their own problems to recognize the global significance of Chinese political collapse. The Tang dynasty had been the world's most technologically and culturally sophisticated civilization, controlling territory from Korea to Central Asia, and maintaining trade relationships that extended to the Byzantine Empire and the Islamic world. The dynasty's collapse represented the loss of innovations in printing, metallurgy, agriculture, and administration that wouldn't be matched elsewhere for centuries. The Anlushan Rebellion was one of history's most destructive civil wars, with casualty estimates ranging from 13 to 36 million deaths. The rebellion destroyed the Tang military system, wrecked the imperial administration, and created regional warlordism that persisted for generations. The Tang collapse also ended Chinese control over the Silk Road trade routes, disrupting commercial relationships that had connected Europe, the Islamic world, and East Asia. The loss of Chinese demand for Western goods and Chinese supply of Eastern products had economic consequences that extended far beyond China itself. Most remarkably, the Tang collapse occurred during the same period as the Carolingian civil wars, the Abbasid fragmentation, and the beginning of Viking expansion. The 9th century saw simultaneous political crises in all of the world's major civilizations, but the interconnections were too weak for any society to recognize the global pattern. Fact number 8. The Islamic world discovered it could live without unity. The 9th century saw the Islamic world abandon the dream of political unity, while discovering that religious and cultural unity could survive and even flourish under competing political authorities. The fragmentation of the Abbasid Caliphate created multiple independent Islamic dynasties: the Aghlabids in North Africa, the Tulunids in Egypt, the Saffarids in eastern Iran, and eventually the Fatimids as a rival caliphate. Each dynasty developed distinct governmental systems while maintaining Islamic religious identity. This political fragmentation was initially seen as a disaster that betrayed the Islamic community's unity. Islamic political theory had assumed that religious unity required political unity under a single caliph who could implement divine law throughout the Islamic world. Instead, the 9th century proved that Islamic civilization could maintain religious, legal, and cultural coherence while supporting multiple competing political authorities. Each Islamic dynasty developed local adaptations of Islamic law, administration, and culture, while maintaining connections to the broader Islamic community. The intellectual and artistic flourishing of fragmented Islamic civilization surprised everyone. Baghdad remained a center of learning, but Cairo, Cordoba, and other regional capitals developed their own scholarly traditions. Competition between Islamic dynasties encouraged cultural patronage and intellectual innovation. The Islamic world discovered that unity of faith and culture was more important than unity of political authority. This lesson would influence Islamic political thinking for centuries and help explain how Islamic civilization survived and expanded despite continuous political fragmentation. Fact number 9. Ireland became the most cosmopolitan place in Europe by accident. The Viking establishment of trading cities in Ireland created an unexpected cultural synthesis that made Irish monasteries and royal courts among the most internationally connected places in medieval Europe. The Viking foundation of Dublin, 841, Cork, Waterford, and other Irish cities introduced urban commercial culture to a society that had been primarily rural and monastic. Irish kings discovered that Viking merchants could provide exotic goods, military equipment, and international connections that enhanced royal prestige. The result was a remarkable cultural fusion. Irish monasteries became centers of international scholarship, where Scandinavian merchants, Frankish scholars, and Byzantine diplomats encountered Celtic learning traditions. Irish kings employed Viking mercenaries, while patronizing monks who preserved classical texts that were being lost elsewhere in Europe. The Irish Church developed distinctive characteristics that combined Celtic traditions with international influences. Irish monasticism emphasized scholarship and artistic production while maintaining connections to continental European religious developments. Irish illuminated manuscripts incorporated Scandinavian artistic motifs with classical and Christian themes. Most remarkably, Ireland became a major center of European slave trading, with Dublin serving as a hub where Scandinavian raiders sold English, Scottish, and continental European captives to buyers from throughout the known world. This brutal commerce created wealth that funded cultural patronage and international connections. The Irish synthesis of Celtic, Scandinavian, and continental influences created a distinctive culture that was simultaneously local and cosmopolitan. Irish scholars traveled throughout Europe, while foreign scholars came to Ireland to study in monasteries that had become internationally famous for their learning. Fact number 10. The 9th century invented medieval chaos, while everyone was trying to create medieval order. The most mind-blowing fact about the 9th century is that it created the characteristic instability and fragmentation of medieval civilization, while every major power was explicitly trying to establish stable, unified governmental systems. The Carolingians had tried to recreate Roman imperial unity in Western Europe, and instead created feudal fragmentation. The Abbasids had tried to restore Islamic political unity, and instead created competing caliphates. The Byzantines had tried to reconquer their lost territories, and instead started centuries of Bulgarian warfare. Everyone was trying to build stable empires while accidentally creating chronic instability. The result was a political system based on constant warfare, shifting alliances, and fragmented authority that would define medieval Europe for the next several centuries. The 9th century established the medieval pattern of ambitious rulers creating temporary unifications that immediately dissolved into smaller competing authorities. Every successful king inspired imitators who fragmented his achievements. Every powerful dynasty created succession crises that destroyed what they had built. Medieval political instability wasn't a failure of medieval governmental systems. It was the inevitable result of governmental ambitions that exceeded administrative capabilities. Medieval rulers consistently tried to control more territory than their communication and transportation systems could effectively govern. The 9th century proved that medieval civilization couldn't sustain large unified empires, but couldn't stop trying to create them. The result was a political culture based on continuous cycles of unification and fragmentation that created opportunities for social mobility, military innovation, and cultural exchange while maintaining chronic warfare and economic uncertainty. By 900, Anno Domini, the medieval world had discovered its characteristic rhythm: bold attempts at empire building, followed by spectacular political collapses, followed by new attempts at empire building. Medieval chaos was fully operational, and everyone was still trying to turn it into medieval order.